Finally, that old hag is gone. Now, all this fortune is mine.
Are you sure about that? Hey there! Grab yourself a coffee and enjoy the story. Alexander Carter stood in front of the full-length mirror, admiring his reflection. At 20 years old, he possessed the kind of good looks that turned heads, thick, dark hair that fell perfectly across his forehead, piercing blue eyes, and a smile that could charm anyone. Today, he wore an expensive custom-tailored suit, a graduation gift he'd received from his latest benefactor, Eleanor Blackwell. Alex, as his friends called him, had grown up in modest circumstances on the outskirts of Boston. His father had abandoned the family when Alex was just 7, and his mother had worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. From an early age, Alex had learned an important lesson. Charm was currency, and he had it in abundance. "You look like $1 million," he told his reflection, straightening his silk tie. "Actually, more like 50 million." He chuckled at his private joke. 50 million was approximately what Eleanor was worth, according to his research. Not that anyone would suspect he'd done such research before pursuing her. Alex had met Eleanor Blackwell 6 months ago while working as a server at an exclusive country club charity gala. Eleanor, despite being 87 years old, maintained an elegant appearance and sharp mind that commanded respect. A widow for 15 years, she was one of the wealthiest women in the city, having inherited and grown her late husband's real estate empire. That night at the gala, Alex had deliberately spilled water on Eleanor's table, creating an opportunity to apologize profusely and engage her in conversation. His genuine-seeming interest in her stories had captured her attention. One coffee date led to lunch, which led to dinner, which eventually led to today, their wedding day. His phone buzzed with a text from his best friend, Darren. "Still can't believe you're going through with this. You're insane, man." Alex typed back, "Insanely smart. 1 year of marriage to a woman with 1 foot in the grave, and I'll be set for life." He deleted the message immediately after sending it, a habit he'd developed since starting his relationship with Eleanor. No digital footprints of his true intentions. Alex's apartment was small, but fashionably decorated. It was the best he could afford on his meager income from part-time modeling gigs and service industry jobs. Soon, he would be moving into Eleanor's mansion in the most prestigious neighborhood in the city. His mother, Diane, emerged from the tiny kitchen. Unlike her son, she looked uncomfortable in her new dress. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Alex?" she asked, concern etching lines around her eyes. "The age difference? It's just so—" "Mom, we've been through this," Alex replied, his voice taking on the tender tone he reserved for when he needed to be convincing. "Eleanor and I have a special connection. Age is just a number." Diane sighed, unconvinced. "Her children are twice my age, Alex. They hate you, and I can't blame them. They think you're after her money." Alex placed his hands on his mother's shoulders. "Let them think what they want. Eleanor knows the truth." The irony of his statement made him suppress a smile. "Besides, don't you deserve some comfort after all these years of struggle? When Eleanor and I are married, I'll make sure you never have to work again." That seemed to soften his mother's resolve, if only slightly. She had always been susceptible to the promise of financial security after years of hardship. A horn honked outside. The limousine had arrived to take them to the small private ceremony at Eleanor's estate. Eleanor had wanted a quiet wedding, much to Alex's relief. Fewer witnesses to his greatest con. "Showtime," Alex whispered to himself, grabbing his wallet and phone. Today was the beginning of his carefully crafted endgame. Marry the wealthy widow. Be the devoted husband for however long she had left. His research suggested it wouldn't be long, given her age, and then inherit a substantial portion of her fortune as her grieving widower. As he stepped into the limousine, Alex couldn't help but smirk. Eleanor's 3 children, Richard, Margaret, and Thomas, had tried everything to stop this wedding. They'd hired private investigators, confronted him with accusations, and even begged their mother to see reason. But Eleanor, perhaps experiencing a final flame of romance in her twilight years, had dismissed all their concerns. Poor fools, Alex thought, as the limousine pulled away from the curb. They have no idea who they're dealing with. By this time next year, the old lady's fortune will already be mine. The ceremony was small but elegant, held in Eleanor's sprawling garden. A string quartet played softly as Alex took his place beside the ornate floral arch. His heart raced with anticipation, not from the joy most grooms experience, but from the thrill of a plan nearing completion. Eleanor appeared, walking slowly down the aisle with the assistance of her eldest son, Richard. At 87, she moved with surprising grace, her silver hair elegantly styled, wearing a cream-colored dress suit that likely cost more than Alex had made in the past year. Despite her age, there was a youthful sparkle in her eyes as she looked at Alex. Richard's face was a mask of barely contained rage as he surrendered his mother's arm to Alex. From the front row, Eleanor's other children, Margaret and Thomas, glared with similar contempt. Margaret dabbed at her eyes, though Alex suspected her tears weren't from happiness. "We gather here today," began the officiant, but Alex barely heard the words. He was mentally calculating how long he would need to play the devoted husband before claiming his prize. A year seemed reasonable, long enough to avoid suspicion, but not so long that he'd waste his youth catering to an elderly woman's whims. When the time came to say, "I do," Alex delivered his vows with convincing sincerity, gazing into Eleanor's wrinkled face with what appeared to be adoration. The small audience of Eleanor's closest friends seemed moved. Only her children remained stone-faced. At the intimate reception that followed, Alex kept Eleanor close, laughing at her jokes and attentively refilling her champagne glass. He was careful to maintain his charming facade, especially when Eleanor's longtime lawyer, James Harrison, approached them. "Congratulations," Harrison said, his tone professional but his eyes scrutinizing. "Eleanor has always followed her heart, even when it leads to unexpected places." "Thank you, James," Eleanor replied with a gentle smile. "Alex brings me joy. That's what matters at my age." Harrison nodded politely before adding, "I've prepared those documents you requested. We can review them whenever you're ready." Alex's interest piqued. "Documents?" "Just some estate planning adjustments," Eleanor said, patting Alex's hand. "Nothing for you to worry about, darling." Before Alex could inquire further, they were interrupted by Margaret, Eleanor's only daughter. In her 60s, with her mother's same steel-gray eyes, she exuded the controlled anger of someone who had been dismissed too many times. "Mother, may I speak with you privately?" she asked, her voice tight. "Anything you wish to say to me can be said in front of my husband," Eleanor replied firmly. Margaret's composure cracked slightly. "Fine. This charade has gone on long enough. He's younger than my son, for God's sake. Everyone in this room knows exactly what he's after." Alex adopted a wounded expression. "Margaret, I understand your concerns, but save it," she snapped. "We've had private investigators look into you. Your sudden interest in wealthy widows isn't as discreet as you think." Alex felt a momentary flash of panic. Had they discovered something concrete? But Eleanor simply sighed, looking more disappointed than surprised. "Margaret, I'm not some doddering old fool. I'm well aware of what people might assume about our relationship, but at my age, I get to decide what makes my remaining days worthwhile." Richard and Thomas had now joined their sister, forming a united front. Richard, the most direct of the siblings, didn't mince words. "Mother, he's been seen meeting with a jeweler about appraising your collection. Before you even married." This was a lie. Alex had been careful, but it planted a seed of doubt that he needed to quickly address. "That's absurd," Alex protested, looking appropriately offended. "I was looking at watches as potential groomsmen gifts. I would never—" "Enough," Eleanor said firmly, her voice carrying surprising authority for someone her age. "This is my wedding day, and I won't have it ruined by baseless accusations. Alex and I are married now. You'll either accept that or excuse yourselves." The siblings exchanged looks of frustration before retreating, but not before Thomas delivered a parting shot. "When she's gone, and you're counting your inheritance, remember we know exactly who you are." As they walked away, Eleanor turned to Alex with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry about my children. They're protective to a fault." Alex kissed her papery cheek. "They love you. I can't blame them for that." Later that night, after settling Eleanor into their bedroom, Alex stepped onto the balcony of the mansion and called Darren. "It's done," he whispered, watching the moonlight reflect off the swimming pool below. "In record time, I might add. No prenup. Her lawyer suggested it, but she refused, said it would tarnish the romance." He chuckled. "What about the kids? Still causing problems?" Darren asked. "They're suspicious, but it doesn't matter. Eleanor trusts me completely." Alex paused as he heard movement inside the bedroom. "I have to go. In a year, maybe less, we'll be celebrating with champagne that costs more than your car." Seat. As Alex ended the call and turned to go back inside, he didn't notice the small figure of Eleanor's longtime housekeeper, Martha, standing in the shadows of the garden below, her face tight with concern as she clutched her phone. 2 months into the marriage, Alex had settled into a routine at the Blackwell estate. He'd transformed one of the mansion's many spare rooms into his personal office, where he spent hours researching investment strategies for the fortune he expected to inherit. The staff, particularly Martha, the housekeeper of 30 years, regarded him with thinly veiled suspicion, but Alex was careful to maintain his charade of devoted husband whenever they were around. Today, he sat across from Eleanor at breakfast, listening to her reminisce about her late husband, Harold. Alex had learned to feign interest in these stories, occasionally asking questions that made her eyes light up with the pleasure of shared memories. "Harold built this empire from nothing," Eleanor said, stirring her tea. "He always said the most valuable asset in business wasn't money, but the ability to read people." She fixed Alex with a penetrating gaze that momentarily unsettled him. "He sounds like a wise man," Alex replied smoothly. "I wish I could have met him." Eleanor smiled, a mysterious expression crossing her face. "He would have seen right through you, dear." Before Alex could respond to this ambiguous statement, the doorbell rang. Martha appeared moments later, her expression tense. "Mr. Richard is here with the attorney, Mrs. Blackwell." Eleanor nodded. "Show them to the study, please. We'll be right in." Alex felt a flicker of anxiety. He'd been dodging Eleanor's children since the wedding, but a meeting with the family attorney suggested something more formal than their usual attempts to undermine him. The study was Harold Blackwell's former domain, its walls lined with leather-bound books and photographs documenting a life of success. Richard stood by the window, while James Harrison arranged papers on the mahogany desk. "Mother," Richard began without preamble, "we've had your recent medical reports reviewed by specialists. The heart condition is progressing faster than expected." Alex struggled to hide his interest. Eleanor had mentioned a minor heart condition, but nothing serious. This could accelerate his timeline considerably. Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "I've lived with this condition for years. The doctors always predict the worst. This time it's different," Richard insisted. "They're recommending immediate treatment options." "Which is why we're here," Harrison interjected, his gaze shifting between Eleanor and Alex. "Given these developments, it would be prudent to revisit your estate planning." Alex felt his palms grow sweaty, but maintained his concerned husband facade. "Darling, why didn't you tell me things had gotten worse? Of course, we should follow the doctor's recommendations." "What we should do," Richard said coldly, "is protect the family legacy before it's too late." Eleanor straightened in her chair, summoning the dignified authority that had built and maintained her social position for decades. "My estate planning is my business, Richard. As for my health, I'll consider the treatment options, but I won't have you using it to manipulate me." Harrison cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately, Eleanor. Anything concerning my wife's health or assets can be discussed in front of me," Alex insisted, playing the role of protective husband. "Like hell it can," Richard snapped. "You've been married for all of 2 months. You have no right to—" "Richard!" Eleanor interrupted sharply. "That's enough." She turned to Harrison. "Whatever documents you've prepared, leave them with me. I'll review them and contact you." After they left, Eleanor seemed exhausted. Alex helped her to her favorite sitting room, genuinely concerned, not for her health, but for the security of his future inheritance. "They mean well," Eleanor sighed as she settled into her chair, "but they forget I've been managing this family and its fortune longer than they've been alive." Alex knelt beside her, taking her frail hand in his. "Are you really in danger? Please be honest with me." The sincerity in his voice surprised even him. Eleanor studied his face carefully. "We're all in danger of something, Alex. I'm an old woman. Death doesn't frighten me nearly as much as being underestimated." She patted his cheek with unexpected tenderness. "Don't worry about the inheritance discussions. I've made provisions to ensure everyone receives what they truly deserve." That night, Alex couldn't sleep. He paced in his private room, adjacent to the master suite he occasionally shared with Eleanor for appearance's sake. Her words about what they truly deserve haunted him. Had she seen through his act? Were her children finally getting through to her? He'd need to accelerate his plan, solidify his position in her will before her condition deteriorated further. He opened his laptop and searched for information on heart conditions in elderly patients, calculating life expectancies with clinical detachment. A soft knock interrupted his research. Alex quickly closed the laptop to find Martha standing in the doorway, her eyes hard with judgment. "Mrs. Blackwell is asking for you," she said. "She's not feeling well." Alex rushed to Eleanor's bedroom, where he found her sitting up in bed, looking pale but composed. "I thought perhaps you would read to me," she said, gesturing to a book on her nightstand. "Harold used to read to me when I couldn't sleep." As Alex began to read, he was struck by a strange feeling. In the dim light, with Eleanor's fragile hand occasionally squeezing his in appreciation of a particularly beautiful passage, he felt an unfamiliar pang of something. Not quite guilt, perhaps, but a recognition of the human being behind the fortune he coveted. The feeling didn't last. By morning, as he watched Eleanor take her numerous medications with shaking hands, Alex was back to calculating how soon he could reasonably expect to be a wealthy widower. The next 3 months brought a noticeable decline in Eleanor's health. Her once steady hands now trembled constantly, and her breathing grew labored when she climbed the mansion's grand staircase. Alex found himself genuinely helping her more often, though his motivations remained unchanged. The faster her health deteriorated, the sooner he'd claim his prize. Alex was reviewing investment portfolios in the study when Martha entered without knocking, her disapproval evident. "Mrs. Blackwell's children are here, all 3 of them. They're waiting in the main living room with Dr. Phillips." Alex closed his laptop with a sigh. These confrontations were becoming more frequent, and while Eleanor had remained steadfast in her support of him, each meeting was a risk to his carefully constructed facade. When he entered the living room, the tension was palpable. Margaret sat beside her mother on the sofa, while Richard and Thomas stood behind them like sentries. An elderly man in a suit, presumably Dr. Phillips, sat opposite them. "Alex," Eleanor said, her voice weaker than he'd heard it before. "My children have brought my physician to discuss my treatment options." "Which should have been addressed months ago," Richard added sharply. Dr. Phillips cleared his throat. "Mrs. Blackwell's condition has deteriorated significantly. The medication alone is no longer sufficient. I'm recommending immediate surgery." Alex's mind raced with calculations. Surgery carried risks at Eleanor's age, risks that could accelerate his inheritance timeline. Yet, if he appeared too eager or dismissive of treatment options, he'd expose his true intentions. "Whatever will help Eleanor," Alex said, taking her hand with practiced tenderness. "What exactly does the surgery entail?" As Dr. Phillips explained the procedure, Alex noticed Thomas watching him intently, studying his reactions. Of the three children, Thomas was the quietest but most observant, and potentially the most dangerous to Alex's plans. "There's a specialist in Cleveland who's had remarkable success with patients in Mother's condition," Margaret said. "We've already arranged a consultation." "Cleveland?" Alex couldn't hide his surprise. That would mean traveling, staying there during recovery. Eleanor barely has the strength for her weekly bridge game. "Exactly why we need to act now, while she can still make the journey," Thomas spoke up, his voice calm but resolute. Eleanor looked tired, more vulnerable than Alex had ever seen her. "I think perhaps they're right, dear. I'm not getting any better here." This was the opening her children had been waiting for, separating Eleanor from Alex's influence. Once she was surrounded by her family and medical professionals, they'd have ample opportunity to convince her of his true nature. "If that's what the doctor recommends," Alex conceded, recognizing the need to appear supportive. "But I'll come with you, of course." "That won't be necessary," Richard said quickly. "We've arranged for private nursing care. The treatment facility has strict visitation policies due to COVID precautions. Family only." The room fell silent as the implication hung in the air. Despite their marriage, Alex wasn't considered family. "I am her family," Alex asserted, forcing an edge of emotion into his voice. "I'm her husband." "For 5 minutes," Margaret muttered. Eleanor reached for Alex's hand. "They mean well, darling. Perhaps it would be easier if I go with them for the treatment. You can manage things here." She glanced meaningfully around the room. "After all, someone needs to look after our home." Our home. The casual phrase sent a surge of triumph through Alex. Despite her children's efforts, she still viewed her assets as partly his. After Dr. Phillips and the siblings left to make arrangements, Eleanor seemed exhausted but resolute. "They're trying to protect me," she said softly. "Just as you would." Alex knelt beside her chair. "I don't trust them. They're using your condition to drive us apart." Eleanor cupped his face with her trembling hand. "At my age, Alex, you learn to see things from all angles. My children believe you married me for money. Perhaps they're right." She held up her other hand to stop his protest. "But whether they're right or wrong doesn't change what matters to me." Alex felt a flicker of unease. "And what's that?" "Finding joy in my final chapter." She smiled with unexpected warmth. "I've lived a long life filled with practical decisions. Perhaps at the end, I'm entitled to a little impracticality." That night, Alex called Darren from the privacy of the garden. "They're taking her to Cleveland for some specialized treatment," he explained. "I'll be stuck here while they work on turning her against me." "Can they do that?" Darren asked. "Legally keep you away? Technically, no. But if I push too hard, I'll look like the gold digger they already think I am." Alex paced along the stone pathway. "I need to be smart about this. Eleanor's still on my side, and that's what matters. Her fortune is substantial enough that even if they convince her to reduce my share, I'll still walk away wealthy. Unless she cuts you out entirely," Darren pointed out. The thought sent a chill through Alex. "She wouldn't. She's too sentimental." As he ended the call, Alex noticed Martha standing at the kitchen window watching him. How much had she heard? The housekeeper's loyalty was entirely to Eleanor and her children. He'd need to be more careful. The next morning, as Eleanor prepared for her journey to Cleveland, she called Alex to her bedroom. To his surprise, she handed him a sealed envelope. "If anything happens during the surgery," she said gravely, "Martha knows where the important documents are kept. And this," she pressed the envelope into his hand, "this is for you alone, a private matter between husband and wife." Alex felt the weight of the envelope, wondering what it contained. A letter affirming her love? Instructions about her final wishes? Confirmation of his inheritance? For a moment, just a brief, disconcerting moment, Alex felt a pang of something genuine as he looked at the fragile woman before him. Not love, certainly, but perhaps a flicker of respect for her dignity in the face of death. "Nothing will happen," he assured her, tucking the envelope into his pocket. "You'll have the surgery and come home stronger than ever." Eleanor smiled, a knowing twinkle in her eye. "We'll see, my dear. We'll see." 3 weeks after Eleanor's departure for Cleveland, Alex had settled into a comfortable routine at the mansion. Without Eleanor's children watching his every move, he freely explored the estate, familiarizing himself with the assets that would soon be his. He spent mornings swimming in the Olympic-sized pool, afternoons driving Eleanor's collection of vintage cars, and evenings sampling rare wines from the cellar, always careful to replace each bottle. Daily updates from Cleveland were promising. The surgery had been successful, and Eleanor was recovering steadily. Though her children still limited his virtual visits, the brief video calls they permitted showed Eleanor looking surprisingly robust. Her color improved, and her voice stronger. "The doctors are calling it remarkable," she told him during their most recent call, her eyes brighter than he'd seen in months. "They believe I might have several good years ahead of me." Several years. The news had sent Alex into a private panic. His plan hadn't accounted for Eleanor's sudden improvement. Several more years of playing the devoted husband would be unbearable. Years of his prime wasted on an elderly woman, while the fortune remained tantalizingly out of reach. Today, however, brought unexpected news. Martha approached him in the garden, her typically stern expression replaced by something more complex. "Mrs. Blackwell is returning tomorrow," she announced. "The doctors have cleared her for travel, and she insists on recovering at home." Alex couldn't hide his surprise. "Tomorrow? That's wonderful news, but I haven't prepared anything. We should arrange a welcome." "Miss Margaret has already arranged everything," Martha interrupted. "The family will accompany her. They'll arrive at noon." This was a setback. Alex had hoped for time alone with Eleanor, to re-establish his influence, before her children could interfere further. "I'll want to pick her up from the airport myself," Alex insisted. Martha's expression hardened. "As I said, the family has made arrangements." That evening, Alex received an unexpected call from James Harrison, Eleanor's attorney. "Mrs. Blackwell has requested a meeting upon her return," Harrison stated without preamble. "Tomorrow afternoon at 3. Her children will be present, as will I." "What's this concerning?" Alex asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. There was a pause. "Estate matters. That's all I'm at liberty to say." After hanging up, Alex paced his room anxiously. Had they finally convinced Eleanor to cut him out? He pulled out the envelope she'd given him before leaving, which he'd yet to open. Perhaps now was the time. Inside was a single sheet of Eleanor's personal stationery. The message was brief. "Alex, my darling, if you're reading this, you're worried about your future. Don't be. I've always believed in giving people exactly what they deserve. With affection, Eleanor." The ambiguous note did nothing to calm his nerves. Was it reassurance or a veiled threat? The next day, Alex dressed meticulously in a conservative suit, preparing for battle. He arranged flowers in the master bedroom and instructed the chef to prepare Eleanor's favorite meal. Every detail needed to reinforce his image as the devoted husband. When the procession of luxury cars arrived, Alex stood waiting at the front entrance. Eleanor emerged from the lead vehicle, supported by Richard and Margaret. She looked remarkably well. Thinner, perhaps, but standing straighter than she had in months. "Welcome home, darling," Alex called, rushing forward to embrace her. Eleanor accepted his embrace with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you for the warm welcome, Alex." The afternoon meeting arrived all too quickly. In the formal dining room, Eleanor sat at the head of the table, flanked by her 3 children. Harrison arranged papers before him, his expression unreadable. "Thank you all for coming," Eleanor began, her voice stronger than Alex had heard it in months. "My recovery has given me time to reflect on many things, including my legacy." Alex felt a chill despite the room's warmth. While in Cleveland, she continued, I underwent additional tests beyond those for my heart condition. The results were unexpected. Thomas handed her a file, which she opened and pushed toward Alex. Advanced stage pancreatic cancer, she said, matter-of-factly. Terminal, with perhaps 6 months remaining. The room fell silent. Despite the grim diagnosis, Alex felt a surge of anticipation. 6 months was a manageable timeline, far better than the several years he'd been dreading. I'm devastated, he managed, reaching for her hand with appropriate distress. Eleanor withdrew her hand subtly. Are you, Alex? Truly? Before he could respond, she turned to Harrison. James, please share the changes we've discussed. Harrison cleared his throat. Mrs. Blackwell has made significant adjustments to her will in light of her diagnosis. The previous version, created shortly after your marriage, left 40% of her estate to you, Mr. Carter. 40%, more than Alex had hoped for. He struggled to maintain his somber expression. The revised will, Harrison continued, establishes a different arrangement. He slid a document across the table. You'll find the details here, but in essence, Mrs. Blackwell has created a dedicated trust for each of her children, with the remainder distributed among various charitable foundations. Alex stared at the document, uncomprehending. And my portion? Eleanor's face remained impassive. There isn't one, Alex. What? The word escaped before he could control himself. Eleanor, there must be some mistake. After everything we've... What, Alex? Eleanor interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp. After you married me for my money? After you explored my home in my absence, sampling wines that are older than you, and driving cars you couldn't afford in a lifetime? Alex froze. How could she know? Did you think Martha wouldn't notice? That the security cameras Harold installed throughout the property wouldn't capture every moment of your celebration while I was away? Margaret placed a small tablet on the table, displaying footage of Alex lounging by the pool, speaking to Darren on the phone, his incriminating words perfectly audible. Once the old lady kicks it, half of this place is mine. Alex felt the blood drain from his face. Eleanor, I can explain. Save it, Richard snapped. We have hours of footage just like this. Eleanor raised a hand, silencing her son. The irony, Alex, is that I knew from the beginning. Do you think a woman who helped build and maintain a fortune for decades would be so easily deceived by a boy barely out of his teens? The realization struck Alex like a physical blow. He'd been played at his own game. Then why marry me at all? He demanded, his facade crumbling entirely. Eleanor smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her aged face. Companionship, entertainment, perhaps a final adventure before the end. And, I admit, to teach my overprotective children that I'm still quite capable of handling my own affairs. She gestured to Harrison, who slid another document across the table. This is a post-nuptial agreement, Alex. Sign it, and you'll receive a settlement of $100,000, enough to start fresh somewhere far from here. Refuse, and we'll release the evidence of your intentions to the press. At your age, such notorious gold digging would follow you for decades. Alex stared at the document before him, the magnificent plan he'd constructed collapsing into ruins. $100,000, a pittance compared to the millions he'd expected, yet more money than he'd ever possessed. You have until tomorrow morning to decide, Eleanor said with finality. Martha will show you to the guest room. I'll be reclaiming the master bedroom. As Alex left the room in stunned silence, he heard Thomas murmur to his mother, You knew all along? Eleanor's reply followed him down the hallway. Of course, dear. I may be old, but I'm far from foolish. Alex stared at the ceiling of the guest bedroom, a small, austere room typically reserved for staff, a far cry from the luxurious master suite he'd shared with Eleanor. The digital clock on the nightstand showed 3:17 a.m., but sleep remained elusive. His mind raced through scenarios, each more desperate than the last. $100,000. The number that had initially seemed insulting now represented his only lifeline. He'd planned for millions, enough to never work again, to live the lifestyle he felt he deserved. Now, he faced the humiliating prospect of starting over with what amounted to a few years' salary for an average person. His phone vibrated with a text from Darren. "What happened? Haven't heard from you in days." Alex couldn't bring himself to respond. How could he explain that not only had he failed, but that Eleanor had been playing him from the beginning? The woman he'd dismissed as a frail, lovesick widow had outmaneuvered him at every turn. Morning light eventually filtered through the thin curtains. Alex had made no decision, had formulated no counter-strategy. For the first time in his life, his confidence had abandoned him completely. A knock at the door announced Martha, her expression devoid of the smug satisfaction Alex had expected. "Breakfast is served in the small dining room," she said formally. "Mrs. Blackwell requests your presence." Alex dressed mechanically in yesterday's rumpled suit and made his way downstairs. To his surprise, only Eleanor sat at the table, looking refreshed despite her terminal diagnosis. "Good morning, Alex," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Did you sleep well?" The polite pretense infuriated him. "How long have you known that I was—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "A gold digger?" Eleanor supplied calmly, sipping her tea. "From the beginning. Your background check was quite illuminating. The mounting debt, the pattern of befriending wealthy older women, the small gifts you've extracted from lonely widows at the country club." Alex felt the color drain from his face. "You knew all that and still married me?" Eleanor set down her cup. "I've lived a long life, Alex, made my share of mistakes and misjudgments. But I learned from each one. My late husband taught me to always see people for who they truly are, not who they pretend to be." "Then why?" Alex demanded. "Why the charade? I told you yesterday. Companionship, entertainment. But there's more." Her eyes grew serious. "I wanted to understand." "Understand what? What drives a young man with your advantages? Looks, charm, intelligence, to prey on the elderly rather than build something of his own?" She studied him with clinical interest. Was it laziness, entitlement, or something deeper? Alex shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. No one had ever seen through him so completely. "My diagnosis is real," Eleanor continued. "The cancer was discovered during my cardiac workup. I have limited time, which clarifies one's priorities remarkably." She pushed a folder toward him. "I've modified the agreement slightly. The settlement remains the same, but I've added a condition." Alex opened the folder warily. "What kind of condition?" 6 months of community service at Sunny Pines Retirement Home. 20 hours weekly, documented and verified." Alex laughed bitterly. "More punishment?" "Education," Eleanor corrected. "An opportunity to see the elderly as people, not targets." She leaned forward. "Complete the service, and the money is yours. No strings attached. And if I refuse, then you leave with nothing but the clothes you arrived in." Her voice hardened. "And I release the footage of your true intentions to every social circle in this city." Alex stared at the document, humiliation burning in his chest. 6 months of changing bedpans and pushing wheelchairs for the same people he'd once targeted. The ultimate degradation. "Why bother?" he asked quietly. "Why not just throw me out?" Something softened in Eleanor's expression. "Because despite everything, I believe people can change when given the right motivation. My children disagree. They wanted you prosecuted for attempted fraud. This compromise satisfies no one, which suggests it might be fair." Alex looked up, meeting her steady gaze. "You're dying? And you're concerned about rehabilitating me? I'm dying, which means I get to decide what legacy I leave behind." She stood with surprising steadiness. "Harrison will be here at noon for your decision. Martha will show you out if you choose to leave." Alone again, Alex wandered through the mansion that had almost been his, trailing his fingers along priceless antiques and artwork he would never possess. His phone buzzed repeatedly. Darren, his mother, even an old friend from his brief college stint. Word was spreading about his fall from grace. In the garden where he'd often plotted his future wealth, Alex sat on a stone bench, confronting the ruin of his ambitions. At 20, he faced starting over with nothing but a tarnished reputation and a string of burned bridges. His phone rang again, his mother this time. He answered mechanically. "Alex? What's happening?" "Mrs. Blackwell's daughter called me, saying I should come get you." "Something about a divorce?" He closed his eyes. The final humiliation now complete. "It's over, Mom. All of it. I don't understand. You said everything was going according to plan." "There was never a plan," he admitted, the words like acid in his mouth. "At least, not mine. She knew everything from the beginning." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Finally, his mother sighed. "I raised you better than this, Alex." Had she? He couldn't remember any lessons about hard work or earning his way, only constant reminders about using his looks and charm to get ahead, to find shortcuts where others took the long road. "Can you come get me?" he asked, hating the desperation in his voice. "I have nowhere else to go." Another pause. "I'll be there in an hour. But Alex, you need to make this right somehow." As he ended the call, Alex noticed Thomas watching him from the terrace, his expression more contemplative than triumphant. "You know," Thomas said, approaching slowly, "when Mother first told us she knew exactly what you were and planned to marry you anyway, we thought she'd finally lost her mind." Alex said nothing, too drained for more confrontation. "She said something I didn't understand until now," Thomas continued. "She said sometimes the most valuable gifts we give aren't to those who deserve them, but to those who need them." "What's that supposed to mean?" Alex muttered. Thomas shrugged. "I think she saw something in you worth salvaging. God knows why." He turned to leave, then paused. "The offer she made you this morning? That was her idea, not ours. We wanted you gone with nothing." As Thomas disappeared into the house, Alex remained on the bench, confronting the hollowness of his existence. His entire identity had been built around using others, around taking shortcuts. Without that, who was he? For the first time since childhood, Alex Carter faced himself honestly and found nothing of substance staring back. Noon arrived with the punctuality of the wealthy, Harrison's luxury sedan pulling into the circular driveway exactly on schedule. Alex watched from the guest room window, the post-nuptial agreement unsigned on the bed beside him. His mother's aging compact car was parked nearby, a jarring contrast to the opulence surrounding it. Alex had spent the morning in quiet reflection, a foreign experience for someone who had always lived on the surface of life, skimming what he could without diving deeper. The profound humiliation of being outplayed at his own game had stripped away his usual defenses. With mechanical movements, he packed his few belongings, designer clothes purchased with Eleanor's money that now seemed like evidence of his failure. He shouldered his bag and made his way downstairs to the study where Harrison waited alongside Eleanor and her 3 children. The room fell silent as he entered. Alex placed the folder on the desk, aware of every eye upon him. "I've made my decision," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Eleanor studied him with those penetrating eyes that had seen through his facade from the beginning. "And what have you decided, Alex?" He took a deep breath. "I won't be signing the agreement." Richard scoffed. "So you'd rather leave with nothing than admit defeat?" "No," Alex replied, surprising himself with his calm. "I won't sign because I don't deserve the money, not even with conditions attached." The statement hung in the air. For the first time since he'd met them, Eleanor's children looked genuinely surprised rather than contemptuous. "Eleanor," Alex continued, turning to his soon-to-be ex-wife, "I owe you an apology, not just for marrying you under false pretenses, but for underestimating you so completely." He paused, searching for words that had never come naturally to him. You saw me for exactly what I was, and offered me redemption anyway. I don't deserve that kindness. Eleanor's expression remained carefully neutral. What will you do now? Alex glanced toward the window where his mother waited in her car. Start over. Honestly, this time. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wedding ring, placing it on the desk. I hope your remaining time is peaceful and surrounded by the people who genuinely love you. He turned to leave, but Eleanor's voice stopped him. Wait. She nodded to Harrison, who produced another document from his briefcase. This is the final version, she said. Before you refuse it, you should read it. Reluctantly, Alex accepted the paper. The terms were identical to what she'd offered earlier, $100,000 contingent upon community service, with one addition. Furthermore, the recipient must enroll in and complete a business degree program at an accredited university, with tuition and expenses to be paid from a separate educational trust established for this purpose. Alex looked up in confusion. I don't understand. Don't you? Eleanor asked. You have qualities that could make you quite successful, Alex. Determination, charm, intelligence. You simply chose to apply them dishonestly, because it seemed easier. She gestured to the document. I'm offering you a chance to redirect those talents toward building something legitimate. Why would you do this? Alex asked, genuinely baffled. After everything I did? Eleanor's expression softened. Because redemption stories have always been my weakness, and because, despite your reprehensible behavior, I saw moments of the person you could become. Alex remembered the nights he'd read to her, the genuine concern he'd occasionally felt despite himself. Had she seen those flickers of humanity when everyone else, including Alex himself, had missed them? Mother, this is absurd, Margaret protested. He doesn't deserve. It's not about deserving, Eleanor interrupted. It's about potential, about the person he might become versus the person he's been. She fixed Alex with a challenging stare. Well, Alex, will you accept my final offer? Not as a reward for your deception, but as an investment in who you might yet be? For the first time in his life, Alex felt the weight of someone believing he could be more than a charming parasite. The sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating. I'll accept, he said quietly, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to prove you weren't wrong about me. Eleanor smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her aged face. That's all I ask. 6 months later, Alex stood beside Eleanor's hospital bed. The cancer had progressed according to the doctor's timeline, leaving her frail but clear-minded. Her children had reluctantly accepted Alex's continued presence in their mother's life, though their interactions remained cool and formal. How was your exam? Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I aced it, Alex replied, setting his textbook aside. Top of the class in business ethics. Ironically enough, a thin smile crossed Eleanor's lips. Not ironic at all. Sometimes those who've walked the wrong path understand the importance of the right one better than those who've never strayed. Alex had honored their agreement to the letter, working at Sunny Pines while carrying a full course load at the university. The experience had changed him in ways he couldn't have anticipated. The elderly residents he'd once viewed as easy marks had become individuals with stories, wisdom, and dignity. I brought something for you, he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was the wedding ring he'd returned months earlier. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. A strange gift for a dying ex-wife. It's not a gift, Alex explained, but a reminder of the person I was and the person I'm trying to become. He placed the box on her nightstand. I want you to keep it, so that when I visit your grave years from now, I'll remember that it took an 87-year-old woman to teach a 20-year-old man how to grow up. Eleanor studied him with the same penetrating gaze that had seen through him from the beginning, but now there was warmth where there had once been calculation. You know, she said softly, when I first discovered your true intentions, I planned a much crueler lesson. The postnuptial agreement was originally going to offer you exactly $1, a public humiliation to match your private deception. "What changed your mind?" Alex asked. "You did," Eleanor replied. "On the nights you read to me when you thought I was too tired to notice, I saw genuine care slip through your facade. Just moments, but they were real." She reached for his hand with papery fingers. "Sometimes people become what you expect them to be. I decided to expect better." 2 weeks later, Eleanor Blackwell passed peacefully in her sleep. At the funeral, Alex stood apart from the family, paying his respects quietly before slipping away to continue the journey Eleanor had set him on. That evening, Harrison contacted him with news of one final surprise. In addition to the educational trust and the settlement they'd agreed upon, Eleanor had left him a personal letter. "Dear Alex, if you're reading this, our unusual journey together has reached its end. By now, you've likely realized what took me decades to learn. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in how we touch the lives around us. You entered my life as a deceiver, and are leaving it, I hope, as a man, beginning to find his true path. Consider this my final investment in that transformation. The money we agreed upon is yours, as promised. Use it to become the man you're capable of being, not the boy who thought an old woman would be easily fooled. With genuine affection for who you're becoming, Eleanor." Years later, when visitors to Sunny Pines, where Alex continued to volunteer long after his required service ended, asked about the framed letter in his office, he would simply smile and say, "It's from the woman who taught me that sometimes the people who see through you are the ones who can truly see you." The fortune he'd once coveted had never become his, but the legacy Eleanor left him proved far more valuable than the wealth he'd schemed to obtain. If you enjoyed this story, type the word wisdom in the comments to let us know you listened all the way to the end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who appreciates a good story about redemption and unexpected lessons. Your support helps us continue bringing these emotional stories to life. Thanks for the coffee and see you next time.